Hello? Oh, good, you can hear me. Okay. We're all running around like headless chickens slightly because the Ukrainian minister has been called into a meeting with Mr. Zelensky. So he can't make the exact timing that we have got in our schedule. Very unreasonably of him, I think. But, I think his priority comes before ours. So we are told that he will be coming online sometime in the next hour. We don't know exactly when, but prepare yourself, you may not get to hear him at all. I think we will, but you may not. So we are going to go ahead with the programme as it's scheduled. We've got a recorded message from Mrs. Zelensky, and we are going to hear the media panel, which is chaired by Michal Hussein, talking about the role of media in developing soft power. We have got a very interesting panel who are going to debate the issues around the nature of media that you can put soft power across in, and the kind of messages, whether countries are investing enough in their media and communication. There are a lot of issues. So if, sadly, we lose the minister, I think we're going to have a very interesting discussion. Now, with that, I will hand to Michelle.
Thank you very much, David. Thanks so much. Hello, everyone. Hello, good morning. I'm going to ask my three panelists to come and take their seats on the stage so that we can get cracking in just a moment. It's a real pleasure to be with you all on a day when this index with all of its findings is launched, and to be able to talk about the role of media in developing soft power over the course of this hour. And we are going to have a particular focus on Ukraine, and any of the others. I'll take this one, I think, but any of those. So we're going to have a particular focus on Ukraine. We're hoping, as David said, to speak to the Ukrainian foreign minister. We do have a message from the Ukrainian First Lady coming up, but I wanted to just show you all, firstly, some of what you'll already have seen from the index, but it's been such a difficult, extraordinary, striking, shattering year in so many different ways because of this war. But I wanted to show you this slide again, which shows that last year Ukraine wasn't even in the top 50 of countries on the Global Soft Power Index, and there it is now. It's shot in to the index for all the reasons that we know about, but particularly, if I can show you the next slide, because of the way that its familiarity and its influence have risen over the course of the last year. Those are the different findings about how its influence has risen in different regions of the world. And I think one of the really interesting things about the influence point is the fact that its influence has risen strikingly, even in regions where, which are not the home regions of many of its most prominent allies. So, for example, if you look at how its influence has gone up in Asia and also in Africa, that gives you a sense of how its influence has gone up. There are also regions where Russia's influence has gone up, but not as much as Ukraine. So that's why I think a portion of the next hour and our conversation with the panel, and hopefully with the foreign minister, will be particularly about Ukraine's use of soft power in the last year. First of all, though, we have a video message that is from the First Lady of Ukraine, Olena Zelenska.
Дорогі друзі, ми тут, щоб говорити про м'яку силу. Тож важливо одразу сказати головне. Російське вторгнення в Україну поставило під загрозу сам принцип м'якої сили у світі. З'ясувалося, поки одні країни вчаться домовлятися та співпрацювати, існує країна-агресор. А коли в сучасному світі будь-де з'являється агресор, це виклик для всіх, бо означає перегляд всіх міжнародних відносин. Кожен мусить визначитися, чи прийнятна мова агресії для нього, чи хоче він, щоб так заговорили до нього. Ось чому я завжди підкреслюю, що Росія напала не тільки на Україну. Вона атакувала одразу всі світові принципи мирного співіснування, права людини і весь прогрес, який ми на цій ниві досягли. Навіщо домовлятися, якщо можна обстріляти? Навіщо вести діалог, якщо можна захопити силою? Кожен наступний ракетний удар по моїй країні був ударом не тільки по живим українцям, а й по всім міжнародним відносинам водночас. По цінності самого людського життя як права. Але в цей же час відбулось щось дуже важливе. Щось, із приводу чого ми зараз тут. Бо несподівано для нападника м'яка сила дала відсіч. Можливо, вперше в історії вона витримала удар цілої армії і тільки зросла. На збройну агресію мільйони людей в Україні і світі відповіли співробітництвом, згуртованістю, захистом, допомогою, людяністю. Згідно дослідження м'якої сили, яку сьогодні презентує бренд Finance, за минулий рік Україна додала найбільшу кількість балів у рейтингу м'якої сили серед 121 країни. Як це стало можливим? Звісно, тут є величезний внесок наших друзів, інших країн. Вони відкрилися до співробітництва, дозволили йому статися. Ви побачили нас, а ми вас. У ваших особах дякую вашим країнам та співвітчизникам. Один із потужних проявів м'якої сили – культура. І вона теж набула нового звучання, починаючи від світових концертів на підтримку України до великого святкування сторіччя Carol of the Bells в Карнегі-Холл, коли світ дізнався, що це є український Щедрик. Так само світ наново познайомився з видатними українськими митцями, яких віками привласнювала Росія. Відкриває для себе українську історію як частину світової, а не радянської чи російської імперської. І, звісно, посланцями м'якої сили стали наші вимушені переселенці. Люди, які несподівано для себе опинилися в інших країнах і розповідають там про Україну, уособлюють її. Бо кожна країна – це її люди. Амбасадором України стала сама наша мова. Нею заговорили одночасно багато країн. Від заяв на міжнародному рівні до поповнення україномовних аудіогідів та якісних перекладів книжок та фільмів. В цей момент дехто в світі вперше з'ясував для себе, що українська – це зовсім не російська. Та всіма можливими мовами ми доносимо правду про те, що у нас відбувається. Попри війну та економічні труднощі, цього року ми були присутні на важливих міжнародних майданчиках – від полів ООН до світових парламентів, розширили співпрацю з великою кількістю інституцій. Ми дуже хотіли повернути світові і собі це порушене війною відчуття, що діалог та людяність набагато ефективніше за економічний та фінансовий примус, який використовує наш ворог. Ось чому річницю російського нападу ми в Україні називаємо інакше – річницею спротиву, солідарності, сили духу. Річницею не тільки збройного самозахисту, а й м'якої сили. Дякую за вашу підтримку і бажаю вам плідних та цікавих сесій. Слава Україні!
And many thanks to Mrs. Zelenska for sharing that with us. She herself is obviously a striking example of Ukraine's soft power. As soon as the foreign minister joins us, or is able to join us, I should see him pop up on one of our monitors here, and then we'll spend some time talking to him. But I'm delighted to now welcome the panel. Deborah Benetti, who's director of the Foreign Press Association here in London. Its members come from about 250 outlets, I think, across 60 countries. And she herself is a correspondent for Il Giorno, the Italian newspaper, and has written a book about Brexit. Andrew Neil is well known as a former editor of the Sunday Times, former BBC presenter and interviewer, long-time political commentator. That hasn't, I don't know when that began, but it certainly hasn't ended.
I can't remember either.
He has his own interview show on Channel 4, and he's the chairman of the weekly news magazine, The Spectator. Nusar Yassin is a YouTuber, social media influencer with a huge global reach, 20 million followers on Facebook. Yassin, I counted yesterday, 11 million subscribers to his YouTube channel. He's on pretty much every other platform as well. Videos on many topics. I think if there's one word that links them, it's probably positivity, but you do feature a whole range of content. And he grew up in a Palestinian family in Israel and now lives in the UAE. Welcome to you all. I think we should start with Ukraine and its demonstration or use of soft power because of what we've just heard, because of the last year, because of the anniversary. Andrew, what do you make of the way that we have seen Ukraine project itself beyond the battlefield?
Well, I think the war has revolutionized our attitude to Ukraine. before the war broke out, people rather looked down on Ukraine. They thought it was corrupt. It was a kind of smaller version of Russia. It had its kleptocrats, its oligarchs, and so on. Was it really a democracy? I think some of that criticism was unfair, but nevertheless, that was the general view. But after the war, after the unprovoked invasion, our attitude started to change. It changed, I think, for two reasons. One, we saw the incredible bravery and fighting abilities of the Ukrainian army, which we didn't think it had, and it had done that, given Mr. Putin something of a shock. I think he's in for another one this spring, come the offensive. But I think also Ukraine was very clever in using social media to project the situation it was in, what the Russians were doing, the barbarity, the Nazi-style barbarity of the Russians in Ukraine, and of the fighting spirit of the Ukrainian people, and of course, having Mr. and Mrs. Zelensky at the top. I mean, you couldn't wish for two better people to project the values of your country. So I think a combination of Ukraine's own tenacity and its very skillful use of social media has created a revolution in the attitude. And it was helped just by the fact people don't really realize Ukraine was pretty hot on digital development before the war. There's a lot of companies had invested there, and a lot of people who knew what they were doing with digital technology, and that has come to fruition. Not as important, perhaps, as the artillery and the soldiers in the field, but important because the soft power has enhanced, I'll just finish on this, the soft power has changed our attitudes, and that has enhanced our attitude towards giving them more hard power. And one of the really interesting things, because I've had so many people tell me, well, the Western solidarity, it'll break. If it goes on too long, it will break. Well, it hasn't broken. Indeed, NATO has never been more united. The Europeans are united in helping Ukraine. Poland is becoming the country that really matters in Europe in this regard now. President Biden has been solid. America has given more help to Ukraine than everybody else put together. We are as one on this to help them see it through. So I think it's been very important.
Deborah?
Yes, I would like to add, we have quite a few Ukrainian journalists who've joined the FPA recently, since the war started. And what I would like to add to what Andrew just said is that Ukraine has managed to put forward one message in so many ways, on so many different social platforms, social media platforms and everything, but the message has been one. And so it has been very, very strong. It's being brought forward by all kinds of people, not just the politicians there, not just the president and Mrs. President, but also all the soft power actors, including not only journalists, but actors, musicians, you know, everybody has
Eurovision last year.
Yes, I mean, that was a fantastic song, by the way. And, you know, everybody has been playing towards the same goal. And I think that's really important. And just to finish, you know, the artillery might not be as strong as others, but what the soft power that they have deployed has done is that it's inspiring. It gets the heartstrings. You know, you feel inspired by watching what Ukraine has done. You want to learn more about Ukraine. You don't particularly want to learn if you just see, you know, military might.
Yassine, as someone who knows all about like how to use different platforms and how to reach people, what do you make of how Ukraine's done it?
Yeah, first of all, hi everybody, nice to meet you. Wake up, and let's chat. To my esteemed panelists, I hope
We were all awake when we were speaking.
No, they were awake, they were awake.
Don't give us this YouTube bollocks here. We're all awake.
First of all, everybody was like this, and then you got like this. I look forward to agreeing and disagreeing with you guys very soon.
Okay.
So I'll tell you a very honest story. Okay, when the war broke out, my first impression was, this is not my war, right? I'm from Israel and Palestinian. That's my war for 75 goddamn years, right? So I felt super occupied, and I didn't pay close attention to it. Then I went to the Grammys in Los Angeles or Vegas or whatever. And then there was Lady Gaga performing, Justin Bieber performing, and then in the middle of their performances, President Zelensky shows up. I was like, well, that's really odd. Like, where did this happen? How did a president of Ukraine show up to the Grammys? And that's when I realized they're really good at soft power. Then I went home and I opened my TikTok and I saw a Ukrainian teenager just like pointing at their destroyed house. And that's when I realized, oh my God, this is a real thing. So thousands of journalists, thousands of BBC
That's what we
journalists.
did too, didn't we?
Yes.
We went home and opened our TikTok.
I
and thought,
didn't
"This is a
realize
real
there
war."
was a war till I looked at
No,
TikTok. But
me
once
neither.
it was confirmed by TikTok,
Yeah.
with its wonderful
Go on, you
curation,
said-
and the,
Wait, hold on, sorry.
and the Chinese government has said it was all right,
Journalists like
Then
Andrew
we were
spoke
fine.
about it for hours and hours and I didn't listen. Somebody on TikTok spoke about it for 10 seconds and I listened. Why is that?
Hang on, so that reached you in a different way.
Yes.
And there'll be millions of other people, obviously, like you, who were reached in that
No, not
in that
millions.
way.
I'm so sorry. This is what, 300
Billions.
people? Twitter is what, 300 million people? Facebook is 2 billion goddamn people. BBC has what, 10 million followers? That's cute. But sorry, no offense.
He doesn't work there anymore.
I'm sorry, I respect you a lot, guys, everybody. But what I'm saying is the scale of Facebook and TikTok is unprecedented. 2 billion people going on Facebook every single day. And if you are not controlling the conversation on Facebook and TikTok, then what the hell are you doing?
What are we doing, Andrew?
Sorry.
How many goddamn people follow you?
only 1.3 million.
Okay.
Sorry.
This could be just a battle of the followers, which obviously we don't want it to be. There are many ways to reach people, right? I think we can all agree with that. I think one of the interesting things, Andrew, is that actually they have been, as you say, and perhaps we'll talk about this. Hopefully, if we get to speak to the foreign minister, we'll ask him about how long and how much of a strategy this has been for a long time. But don't you find yourself looking back now to 2014 and thinking, why didn't we wake up to all of this at that point?
Well, there were some people who said we should wake up. But I'm afraid President Obama sold the pass because we needed America to take the lead, and he didn't take the lead. And at the time, Europe Germany was still in this bizarre situation where he thought if it bought Russian gas, it could control Russia, its worst instincts, and so on. French foreign policy was still that it could deal directly with Russia, one-on-one. French have always felt they had a special relationship with Moscow. Britain did want to take a tougher line, but it couldn't get the Americans on side. And there were shades of the 1930s here. You know, we didn't do anything when Hitler moved into the Ruhr Valley. We didn't do anything when he ended the demilitarization of the Ruhr. Didn't do anything when he took part with Anschluss in Austria. Didn't do anything when he took the Sudetenland. Didn't do anything when he took the rest of Czechoslovakia. Of course, if we'd had TikTok, all that would have stopped. Hitler said, no more the TikTok in Sudetenland. And it took us finally to Poland to do. I think this time we've moved a bit more quickly. It's difficult. You know, we all wanted a peace dividend after the Cold War. No, we didn't really understand, as we didn't with Hitler in the 30s, just how aggressive, how revanchist Mr. Putin was. His desire to recreate a greater Russia, not a Soviet Union, but a greater Russia, which meant complete control of what they called the near abroad. So it could have been done, but it's been done in time. It's been done in time this time. It's better than the 30s.
Okay, let's just pivot away from Ukraine for just a moment to talk about both about technologies and platforms, but also about perception of the UK, because all of you here, I think you know, will be hearing from a former Prime Minister shortly. But Deborah, it's interesting to see where the UK is in this soft power index after a year when we had 3 different prime ministers and 2 monarchs. So it was a very eventful year. What do you make of how the UK?
I was surprised to see
surprised to see the UK up there.
Yes, because even though this is a great country, and of course, you know, I live here and I love it. I'm Italian, by the way. You know, I'm surprised to see it still up there. I wonder whether the books have been cooked. I shouldn't say that.
But you can't say that.
I'm
there are hosts.
What I was trying to say is that, you know, after Brexit, I think that the perception of this country, in particular in Europe, has changed. And it has become, abroad, a bit less friendly. It feels much more hostile towards immigrants of all kinds. All the strikes that we see, you know, have brought it to a point where people are asking, is it gone back to the 70s? What's going on in Britain? All this political turmoil. You know, again, just a reference, you know, I come from Italy. This is political turmoil. You know, it's serious. And I have experience of Italian political turmoil, and this is right up there. So, you know, I do think that I'm surprised to see it in second spot, and I think it can do better. You know, at least get to first spot. But
That's impossible.
if the books are,
you can't take the US.
No, well, exactly. I don't know if the perception.
Deborah, may I say that maybe your sense is slightly out of date in that political turmoil in the, you know, in that very turbulent period, no doubt was the case from the summer onwards and before, that perhaps we're now at the start of this new year in a slightly different place, including with Brexit.
Well, including with Brexit, Northern Ireland Protocol is still not solved. We call it Windsor Framework now, but that's still not, it hasn't gone through. Are you still awake, or shall I do a TikTok?
I'm totally awake.
Okay.
We need the Windsor Framework TikTok. I'm sure it exists.
Guys,
yes.
Very interesting.
Yeah. I saw you dozing there for a second. No, I don't think it's solved. I think Brexit is not solved at all. We're not at the end of it. Yes, we have a prime minister that stayed in power now, you know, for 4 months, I think. That's not a lot. And
it's a record.
Well, it's a record with the Tories recently, yes, but, you know, it's not a lot. And I do think that, yeah, there is more to do.
Well, Yassine, let me ask you, what do you think the perception of the UK currently is then? You live in the UAE, you're a Palestinian from Israel. What's the sense?
Like, honestly, if you want, I could bullshit an answer and pretend to be smart.
Well, why change?
But like, I don't want to pretend.
Do you want to try TikTok and see what to say?
I mean, I'd love to. I don't think you have it installed. But the perception of the UK
is
not something I think about on a daily basis. So I cannot give an answer because I don't think about the perception of the UK because it's such a tiny thing for us, right? There's 197 countries. We don't think about the perception of the UK every single day.
But, well, let me ask you then how you do work for governments sometimes, don't you? Sometimes with governments, okay.
Big difference.
As in videos, but there are times when your content is paid for by a government.
Correct.
Right. And what are the most striking examples of that lately? Who have you chosen to work with and not work with?
Yeah, so here's something I've noticed, okay, which is in the past, big governments used to go to established media, established magazines to try to change their image and help them with soft power. And now, in the past 5 years, big governments are now changing that direction and going to individuals instead. So instead of going to the BBC, they're going to David or to Andrew or to
They do both, I think.
Well, we'll see. We'll see. So actually, we've worked with many governments from Denmark to Singapore to the UAE. And, you know, our primary purpose is to promote trade, tourism, and bring people together. However, sometimes you get approached by the Chinese government, for example, right? And they say, we want you to promote Xinjiang, the tourism in Xinjiang. And you're like, well, that's not something we can do. So there are some limits to what you can do and what you cannot do. But what I'm telling you today is that governments have figured out a cheaper way to get soft power, which is to go directly to the source, the content creator.
So how do you label, if you're doing a campaign essentially for the UAE or any other, how do you label that?
Yeah, so the labeling of sponsored campaigns, whether it's for an app company, a startup, or a government, is only legally required in the US. Luckily, there's not 190 other countries that are not the US. So I don't live in the United States, so there's no legal requirements to do that. However, it's very obvious in the video that this is supported by the brand or the company or the government or whatever.
You don't label it?
I don't label it, no.
Okay. And you don't, do you think that's Like, what about the people who don't realize and who think you've just gone there?
Well, I think governments have been doing it for decades. Have you labeled the BBC on YouTube as a state broadcaster? Have you?
It's not a state broadcaster.
Okay, whatever.
It's a public service broadcaster.
Okay, Al Jazeera, Russia Today.
Al Jazeera is a state broadcaster.
No, but it was only labeled last year.
But it's funded. It is funded in. Al Jazeera is funded in a different way to how the BBC
It is
funded.
not the job of independent media or proper journalists to burnish the image of governments or companies. Our job is to hold them to account, to expose them when they do wrong or are incompetent, inefficient. We're not propagandists for them. You're a propagandist for the UAE and its companies.
Okay.
We are not. We are not. And I've published 70 magazines in the UAE, so I know how it works on that. And I know the controls that you have to go through. Our job is to hold government to account. I can never remember a government coming to me, whether the BBC or The Economist or the Sun Times, The Spectator, asking me to improve their image.
Can I respond?
Because they know that the first thing we do is government approaches media to improve
But you might
image.
have run.
We're not doing
but
it.
you might have run ads. I'm sure you did run ads.
Yeah, well,
Ads
yeah.
are different.
No, but I think that's probably the
no, he's
parallel
making
you're
content.
drawing.
First of all, just for a second, propaganda is not a bad word. Just to frame
No, it is,
propaganda.
actually.
No, propaganda
No,
is
it is a
basically
bad
sending
word.
a message. Maybe for someone in the UK it is. That's number one. Number two is we've given media to people like you for hundreds of years, and you only cared about Kenya when there's a bomb attack. So now everybody thinks Kenya is full of bomb attacks. So yes, your job is to hold government accountable, but as you do your job, you have shaped public perception in a negative way for 195 countries where the majority of people still think the Middle East is just deserts. So have you done your job? I don't think so. There's a lot of other things that BBC will never say about the UAE, which is actually objectively good. Who's going to say it?
Like?
Yeah. Okay, 25% of the UAE's electricity comes from nuclear energy now, which is sustainable energy. Let's say
But Yassine, there's no reason that wouldn't be covered on the BBC.
Yeah.
But I've reported on that, and one of the reasons I reported...
And how many views did it get? No, that's true. You
hold on,
but
look,
who listened?
you've raised an example.
But who listened?
The fact that the UAE has invested in nuclear power, it is done so that it doesn't have to use its fossil fuels to generate electricity. The interesting thing too, it also links it with desalination, because nuclear power depends on a load factor, and desalination, you just keep on doing the same thing all the time. But the reason why it was an interesting story, even for British newspapers or broadcasters, was that UAE had gone to South Korea for the technology, and they did it in record time and on budget. Whereas we've gone to the French, who've now 5 years over and twice over budget.
Is it only 5 years?
It's got a long while before it opens. They haven't opened the one in Helsinki yet. So these were stories that are all done. These are, and the idea that the whole world thinks that the Middle East is just a desert is complete nonsense. The UAE itself is packed with international media. It's got its own media center where you get a special license to operate from the government.
Deborah, I just want to talk about a different part of the world, which is Europe. You're Italian. You can see in this soft power index that Germany holds a very strong position, consistently strong position. What do you make of overall European media outlets, and to what extent they project a global reach for their individual countries?
Well, the difference between the UK's position towards international media and the general position of many European countries towards international media is completely different. So I think that soft power, apart from what he's been talking about, which is more sort of ads in my mind and not journalism, and I'm not, you're not posing as a journalist, so that's absolutely fine. But as a journalist, you do have to filter, you do have to do your job. And so the best way to do that is to have access. And if a country is interested in sort of, projecting its soft power, it really needs to welcome international media as well as its own. This country is still not doing that very well. And I do think that the problem for most of us here, and basically the Foreign Press Association here in London is the biggest in the world, and it's the oldest. And there's a reason for that. It's the biggest because this country is interesting to so many other countries abroad. And also, because it's the oldest, because right from the start, 1888, by the way, that was when it was founded, people started arriving here to try and cover Jack the Ripper stories, and they couldn't get anywhere. And so they got together so that they could have a little bit of leverage with the various...
Sorry, so you think the UK is not welcoming to international media?
No, not particularly. I'm not saying it's not
No, but in what
welcoming.
way? Explain, I'm very surprised.
Yeah, well, we don't get any kind of automatic access, which is what you get to government briefings, it takes a lot of grafting from the FPA and also from individual journalists who want to get, who want to write, for instance, a profile of Keir Starmer. That's difficult to get if you're an international journalist. If you're a British journalist, no problem whatsoever. And I'm not casting any shade on...
I'm not so sure about that.
Well, okay. No, I don't want to cast any shade on the Labour government.
Try getting an interview with Boris Johnson, who's coming up shortly.
Yeah.
It's the only reason I'm here. I thought I might grab him for an interview on the way up. Can I just pick up on something that was said earlier about Britain and soft power? I'm not in the least surprised that Britain is second only to the United States in soft power. This country has been a soft power superpower for many, many years. It's just the British are so down on themselves, they don't realize it. And one of the reasons it is because it's so broadly based as a soft power superpower. It's across the whole range of creativity and of audio-visual activities. It is true that the past couple of years have not done much necessarily to enhance Britain's overall reputation, but I would say two things about that. One, perception lags reality. And it may be that the global perception of Britain is still a couple of years out of date. That may be one. But I think the other reason is that the reason why this country is so highly regarded as a soft power is really nothing to do with politics at all. It's much more cultural, musical, movies, television, culture in the broadest sense, popular, and see, royal family, all the rest of it.
BBC.
I think it's not
the BBC.
Well, that's media. And I think that our media is a crucial part of our soft power, our broadcast and our print and our digital media. And at the same time, I might just give you two figures. There are now more Hollywood blockbusters made in Britain than there are in Hollywood now. And as of October of this year, there will be more television and film studio space in Greater London than in Greater Los Angeles. That's soft power.
Okay. Thank you all. We'll hopefully come back. Well, we will almost certainly come back to you all in a moment. But I'm really pleased to say that the Ukrainian Foreign Minister is now on the line from Kiev. Foreign Minister, I hope you can hear me. Welcome.
I can. I'm happy to be with you.
Thank you very much for taking the time to be with us. So we've already talked about Ukraine's position in this year's Soft Power Index and about the striking way that you have used your used social media and fought a battle essentially for the perception of Ukraine beyond the actual battlefield. Tell me about the strategy behind that and when you and the Ukrainian government started to think really hard about how to use all kinds of avenues to project yourselves.
Well, the starting point is definitely 2014, when Russia invaded Ukraine and illegally occupied Crimea, and this invasion was accompanied with enormous propaganda effort. And we realized that we absolutely have no tools to counter that, to spread our narrative around. And to some extent, we significantly lost the war then. And, but of course, it prompted us to begin working on building our communications. And since February 2022, what really works are very simple things. We have a powerful story to tell. It's a fight of the good against the evil. We have a strong hero who represents his nation, President Zelensky. And we are pretty skilled in using all available tools of communication. So I don't have to shy away. Yes, we know pretty well how to work in this area. to tell our story, to set our narrative. And the last thing that creates this advantage for us is the most important one. We tell the truth. And truth sells. Sometimes it doesn't, as many media would argue, but when it comes to the war between of this scale and of this media exposure, because I think this is probably the most media covered war in even since 20th century. It's when you stand for truth and multiple sources, they reinforce your message because you speak the truth. That really helps to reach out and to penetrate audiences.
Does that mean that this was a strategy that was planned right down to some of those images that we saw from the night that the war began, really? President Zelensky, you know, armed on out in the middle of Kiev. I remember that was one of the early videos. President Zelensky's dress, the fact that we've seen him pretty much in battle dress for this entire year. No one's seen him in a suit or anything like that. Did you think it through down to that kind of detail, or was some of that spontaneous?
Listen, when you find yourself at the edge of death, no strategy will work. Even if you had one, it doesn't work. What you begin to do is just to try to survive whatever happens, whatever it takes. And your brain becomes to function in a peculiar way when it faces the risk of extinction. I mean, it's biological stuff that all communicators understand now. So no, none of us had a wardrobe, a military wardrobe in the back. I started wearing casual. I'm a foreign minister. I know everything about suits, ties, and cufflinks. You know, when the war began, I realized that I don't know how to wear casual stuff. So I had to go to the nearest shop and buy something for me. And the same goes for media. No, the only thing that really came to life between 2014 and 2022 is the understanding that we are fighting against a very strong enemy in the field of information, reputation, and narrative building, narrative construction of narratives. And second, we learned how to use social media to that end. But everything that's happened after February 2022 was rather spontaneous reaction and attempt to survive and win in this struggle. But of course, the more you do, the more perfect you get. It's very simple. And unfortunately, we have a lot of practice, so we're getting better and better.
There is quite a striking difference in successive polls in the way that you're perceived by European and American citizens, you know, who are strongly in support of helping Ukraine to win the war, and when the citizens, you know, people in India, Turkey, or China, for example, are questioned to the extent that that's possible about their perceptions of Ukraine. They're much more likely to say, if Ukraine ends up ceding territory, so be it. Do you have a strategy to reach people in those countries? Is social media a way that that you can try and change those perceptions in countries, you know, in countries where governments are not necessarily on your side?
I have 3 simple rules that I personally try to follow in my communications with what is called Global South, usually. But before I mention them, I want to say one thing. Global South is more nuanced than it might appear. So there is kind of a broad notion, a perception that Global South is against Ukraine, Global South is with Russia, or it's hesitating, it's somewhere in the middle. It's far more nuanced because every country is to some extent an island, and every country is special, and you have to look deep into that country to understand the audience and how to work with it. When I did my Africa tour and saw everything with my own eyes, and I spoke with the people, when I did my visit to Cambodia in Asia for the ASEAN summit and had an opportunity to speak with a lot of people from Asia, In the end, everything I'm trying to communicate to them can be boiled to three things. First, you have to speak with them. The more you speak, the more familiar they get with the issue, and the more colorful it gets. You know, it's not just a black spot, something happening over there. Second, you have to speak with a lot of respect. Most of these countries are traumatized with their own history. For them, Europeans messing up among each other, you know, is an issue, because historically they were always paying a price for that. So you have to treat these audiences with a lot of respect and do not take anything for granted. Sometimes you really have to start with an alphabet, you know, to build the story. And finally, what really works is, you know, putting them in our shoes. Basically, when someone tells me that Ukraine could concede a part of the territory in order to stop the bloodshed and end the war and make life easier for everyone, you don't have to go into a lot of politics and historical context and explain why it doesn't work. What really works is just to say, are you ready to concede a square kilometer of your own country to your neighbor, simply because your neighbor decided to take that square kilometer away from you? The answer is always no. As of now, I have not met anyone who would agree to concede his territory to the neighbor. So if it doesn't work with you, why do you think you have the right to advise or to base your argument on this when it comes to us?
We can see, not just from you, but from other members of your government and the Ukrainian people, the will and the determination. But as we go towards the spring and as you look towards the rest of the year, what do you think are going to be the most difficult moments and issues for your country?
The most difficult thing is to set the narrative straight and make it a mainstream narrative that the war is a sequence of battles. You can lose one battle, you can win another battle, but what really matters is that you win the war. And every time we are less successful on the front line, we see the spike in discussions. Okay, maybe it's time to sit down, maybe it's time for Ukraine to make concessions. Oh, they're not capable of doing it, this is not going anywhere. We've heard it, we've been there, we've seen it. I mean, this doesn't work, but there must be a fundamental narrative that Ukraine can win, it will win, and we will do everything what it takes to achieve that as long as it takes. This is the biggest challenge that we have to work on, that support does not get dependent on the state of play on the front line.
But there will be that point, won't there, when, we don't know at what point militarily it comes, where you most likely do end up across a negotiating table from the Russians. Is it the case that you want to be the ones who say, yes, we've reached that point, rather than have allies or enemies telling you that this is the time?
Yes, and I think we have achieved that, because if you listen carefully to the messages coming from our key allies and partners, they all say it will be Ukraine who will decide when to sit down with Russia and on what terms this kind of talks should be based. So we've done that. But this narrative, it can be shaken up by developments on the front line, and also by domestic political developments in respective countries. So that's why I made the point that I made, that we have to ensure that this narrative remains rock solid and consistent, and people base their policy and their decisions on these fundamental points. Ukraine will win, and it will be for Ukraine to decide what victory means.
Okay. And just finally, back to the soft power thought. Do you see your use of soft power, use of social media, as an important way to nudge even allied governments? And I'm thinking particularly of the way that when the whole debate about the tanks was raging and the German government hadn't yet committed, It was quite striking to see how many German citizens were saying, free the leopards, send them to Ukraine.
Absolutely. We all live on social media. I mean,
listen to him.
We may recognize it or not, but both the people and politicians, we are all on social media. This is the statement of fact. And of course, this is why the social media matters so much. And social media is actually a separate battlefield. If you are to seriously fight on that battlefield, then social media is a separate battlefield, because what works on Facebook doesn't work the same way on Instagram, not to mention TikTok and other stuff. Yeah, these things have to be taken absolutely seriously. They are, like in Africa, for example, I asked one politician, who would, do young people still listen to chiefs of tribes they come from? And the response was no, they listen to WhatsApp and Instagram. That's what they listen to. This is what really matters. So when reality reaches that point, of course, you have to treat social media seriously. Unfortunately, social media, especially Meta, they and their product Facebook, I think they still have a lot of space to improve on their standards when it comes to the war of aggression, because many users in Ukraine suffer from being banned by Meta because its standards and protocol allow that. Because their protocol missed one very important point. When there is a war between an aggressor and a victim of the aggressor, these are not two equal sides. There is one bad side in this story, and there is one good side in this story. And the idea, of course, that social media sell to us in their mission statements is that they are always on the side of the good, right? So if you are on the side of the good and not on the side of the evil, then when it comes to a war of aggression, you have to be on the side. You don't have to play neutrality.
Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us. Okay.
I win.
Yes, see.
I win the argument, Andrew. You heard the minister himself.
Look, I don't know whether you were in the room or not, but my very first answer to the first question from Michel was about how Ukraine had used social media to enhance its reputation and bolster its hard power. Social media. The minister just confirmed that there. What bit did you miss?
Oh, I missed the bit where we downplayed the role of social media as the TikTok. When you were saying the TikTok, if TikTok was there, we could have avoided war.
That was just taking the piss out of you. It's a well-known part of British soft power.
But Yassine, the minister was also making the point about values and judgments and what is lacking on the social media platforms.
Standards.
Accuracy.
Guys, if you... First of all, traditional media, traditional journalism is the Titanic. Social media is the fucking iceberg, okay? Sorry for saying the F word. I apologize. What I'm trying to say is, everybody tends to downplay social media. There's no standards, there's no fake news, there's no journalistic integrity. When in fact, the power of the crowd in giving you all sides of the story is unprecedented. Right? When in fact, if I listen to Andrew's show, I only get Andrew's opinion or whatever the current thing is, right? But in social media, you actually get
I'm restraining Andrew at this point.
So what I think about social media is that it gives you diversity of opinion, which is something I assume everybody likes.
It's a kind of false argument, because all what we used to call legacy media is now wholly invested in social media. Every major media company in the world has a major digital play. I'm chairman of the oldest magazine in the world, founded in 1828, probably with a quill pen when it first started. We are in the cutting edge of digital technology now. Everybody, the BBC.
Come on, Yassine, there's space for us all. I think we can say that, can't we?
I'll give you a fun fact. BBC on YouTube has 4 billion views. Nas Daily has 5 billion views, okay? So yes, all traditional media is on social media, but what I'm trying to say here is that you're not doing it well enough, or you're not doing it as well as you could. Sitting in $1 million studio with a suit and tie does not relate to my 17-year-old brother back home, right? So yes, everybody's investing in social media, but who's actually succeeding?
But isn't it the content then that you're talking about? Because when you said to the audience, wake up, hey, I'm here, it's because we were talking, especially Andrew, but I was trying to keep up with him. We were talking about serious and maybe boring things. And the news can be serious and boring. Whereas I understand that maybe your content is much glitzier, but
yes,
governments hand things to you to promote.
Well, first of all, not governments. I'm not a government agent, okay? Like 99% of our videos we lose money on.
Okay, so how's that working for you?
Well, here's the difference. I don't have everybody in the UK giving me money to fund the BBC with hundreds of millions of dollars. Last month, we had 461 million views on social media, and we made $20,000 from 461 million views. So if you're wondering, why do social media people have to go work with brands and sell you flowers and Coke and governments, is because the way media is structured today, there is no money. So we have to go find ways to make money. And you don't have to do that because the government pays for you. Great, good for you, but I have to pay for my 100 employees.
Well, actually, the people pay for us.
Yeah.
No, you force them to pay. It's not like a donation.
No, that's not the case. But
I think just the final thing to say on this, at a time when we are in the middle of the worst war in Europe since the Second World War, is that if I'm Polish, close to the eastern border of Poland, and I'm worried about how things are going in Ukraine, and I'm worried that if Mr. Putin wins in Ukraine, that we will be next, that Poland will be next, I can assure you I'm going to be listening to the BBC and not you on TikTok.
Okay.
okay.
But they're not listening. You sounds nice, but they're not listening. The minister himself told you social media is our direct way.
Yeah, but lots of different kinds of contents on social media, as discussed. Anyway, we are eating into Boris Johnson's time.
Bad thing to do.
Terrible.
So I'm going to say thank you very much to Nusar Yassin, to Andrew Neil, to Deborah Bonetti, and to you all. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
So now we get to keynote time. First of all, I'd like to express thanks to the BBC, who are our media sponsor for this event. Thank you. They've been very kind in supporting us with this event for the last several years, and it's great to have them. So thanks for this support. Secondly, where it comes to choice of keynote, in first year we had Ban Ki-moon, ex-head of the UN, who was obviously quite neutral. Second year we had Hillary Clinton, who obviously has a particular point of view about things. And last year our keynote speaker was Guy Verhofstadt, who some of you may know as the ex-Prime Minister of Belgium, but arch-federalist, arch-anti-Brexiteer. I have to say, within Brand Finance, there are slight differences of opinion about Brexit. Certain members of the fraternity voted for it. Strangely enough, more than half the population voted for Brexit, but you wouldn't know that now because nobody will ever admit to it. But the fact is that there are split opinions, and last year I succumbed, and we had Guy, who was very inspirational and interesting, and he really wants a totally federal integrated Europe. So I thought that this year it would be fair to balance up the argument by having someone on the other side, and we were fortunate enough to get Boris Johnson to speak. I believe that this is Boris's first major speech in Europe. I hope that's true. And I was told to brief Boris, but then someone said, well, don't bother because he doesn't listen to briefings. He says exactly what he wants to. So I have absolutely no idea what is in his speech. With that, I will hand to Boris. Thank you.
Well, thank you very, very much, David, and good afternoon, everybody. Great to be here at this Brand Finance Global Brand Summit, Global Soft Power Summit, and thank you for that. I'm delighted to be sticking up for the other point of view after Guy Verhofstadt last year. And I'm going to give you a bit of an analysis of soft power, folks. And I'm going to begin by saying I was going for a run the other day in the park, and the trouble with these days, it gets lighter and lighter so that I become more easy to recognize under my beanie hat. And some fit young geezer shot past me, looking actually a bit, not much hair, he looked a bit like one of my former advisors. And he sang out a cheery London greeting. Wanga, he said. And I am normally impervious to these types of things, but I'm afraid this time I seethed and I thought, you rotter. I thought, it's a beautiful day, it's a beautiful park, and the sun is just peeping over the gorgeous London skyline, for much of which I gave planning permission. The swans and the coots are all innocently doing their thing, and you have to go and be so rude. And do we have to put up another sign by the one that says, don't feed the duck, saying don't shout at the politicians? And then I relaxed, and I thought, what a wonderful country it is that we live in, and how privileged I am to be shouted at on my morning run, because it shows how minimal is the distance between the government and the governed. And if you doubt what I'm saying, then just try to imagine Vladimir Putin, with or without his T-shirt, running around Red Square and being shouted at. And what would they do? Would they do that? Would they shout as they shouted? I mean, they wouldn't. They would scatter from his path like pigeons. And what we had there in that admittedly somewhat one-sided exchange was therefore something of incalculable value to this country and to our economy, which is the freedom to say more or less what you like to more or less whomsoever you choose. And as I say this, I'm conscious that people in Britain today are worried about a sense that they are being muzzled. And of course, people should be vigilant about freedom of speech when we're bowdlerizing Roald Dahl. But nothing and no one is going to stop me reciting the song of the Oompa Loompas about Augustus Gloop, which you all remember. Augustus Gloop, the great big greedy nincompoop. What's wrong with that? It made me weep with laughter as a child. And frankly, I'd be very surprised if anybody at SIS in Vauxhall behaved towards their secretaries as Bond behaved towards Moneypenny. But that doesn't mean we should be banned from reading Fleming's novels. And in all this debate, we should never confuse our feelings of irritation at wokeness or political correctness with the genuine terror inspired by authoritarian systems, where journalists are shot for insulting politicians, where they are not hailed for exposing corruption, but jailed. And we should remember how lucky we are to live in a country and a culture where speech and thought are so free, because it's those freedoms, freedom of speech, freedom to live your life how you choose, provided you do no harm to others, freedom to love whomsoever you choose, that turn this city, have turned this city and this country into a great magnet for talent. The world's top chefs. At one stage, I think, in London, I used to say when I was mayor, we had more Michelin stars than Paris. So the French were so alarmed by this that they churned out a load of Michelin stars in a kind of North Korean way to overtook us. We have the world's best minds in this country. That's why we have 4 of the top 10 universities in the world, one Cambridge college boasting more Nobel Prizes, I think, than Russia and China combined. The world's most astonishingly gifted artists and musicians and actors. I think at one stage, 6 of the best-selling songs in the world were written in this country. We have the world's best cultural scene, the world's best museums here in London. The British Museum has more visitors per year than about 7 whole EU countries. And I'm famed for my diplomacy, as you can see. And it is that fantastic concentration of riches in one building that holds up a mirror to all of humanity and tells the story of the evolution of the human spirit. And so, if you give back the Elgin marbles to Greece, then you leave a huge gap in that narrative. And above all, you have no answer in the years ahead to the theoretical claims for restitution from Egypt and Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Turkey, Nigeria, everywhere, whose treasures are housed in Bloomsbury. And suddenly, in trying to please the world and correct thinking, you've deprived the world of one of its great treasures and cut some vital panels from its great pageant of human progress. Those gods and heroes came to our country in 1812 as refugees from the Ottoman lime kiln. They were going to be melted down to make cement. And they've become part of our lives. We can't send them away any more than we should deport the 40% of Londoners who were born abroad, including me, by the way. People who come here because they sense that excitement and that freedom, and they know that they will not be judged here, and they won't feel the lash of prejudice. They know that they will be coming to a safe society where the police will apply the law to everyone, high or low. I used to make a joke about how they once arrested Prince Andrew in the shrubbery of Buckingham Palace, which I thought was pretty funny, until they actually fined me for having lunch at my place at the cabinet table in 10 Downing Street. Although I still don't understand the rationale behind it, I do understand the key point, that the law is enforced here without fear or favour. And that is the greatest freedom of all. Freedom under the law, because they don't have that everywhere. And it is freedom under the law that enables the political and economic freedom on which we rely. I mean capitalism, the freedom to spend our own money. I mean democracy, freedom to vote for whomsoever we choose, and of course freedom to kick that person out at the next election. You can have capitalism without democracy, and there are some countries that do well on the soft power index that come into that category. And you can even have democracy without capitalism. At least I think you can try. I think democratic socialism is the program for Keir Starmer's Labour Party, though I'm not sure. I don't want to offend the human bollard and wind him up even more than I have done already. The great Sir Crasharoony snoozefest, as I call him. By the way, I just want to just to point out, purely for accuracy, when I stepped down, we were only a handful of points behind the Labour Party at that moment back in July. I'm just saying that. But if you want real success, if you want to be a soft power superpower like the UK, then you need both. You need capitalism and democracy. Democracy matters, because if Putin had been living in a free society with a free media, he would never have made the catastrophic mistake of invading Ukraine. He would never have been so deluded about the true nature of that country. Imagine if we had the BBC, wonderful organisation sponsoring us today, on his case, let alone Tory backbenchers, instead of listening to a cabal of cronies. He would have known that the Ukrainians are a great and patriotic people and that they would fight for every inch of their land. And if you want a perfect example of why democracy and capitalism need to go together, look at the COVID vaccines. Who in this room has been vaccinated? Just about everybody, absolutely everybody. Anybody not been vaccinated? Has any? Oh, there you go, okay, a brave self, or for whatever reason chose not to be vaccinated. Fine. But can I ask you, as a matter of interest, who had Sputnik? Anybody have Sputnik? No? Who had Sinovac or Sinopharm? Okay, a couple. Okay, who had AstraZeneca? I did. Who had AstraZeneca or Pfizer? Like, I think, there you go. I think AstraZeneca invented in Oxford, room temperature vaccine, licensed around the world. I think it was one of the most beautiful and moving examples of UK soft power I can think of in recent years. And it's a notable fact that after all the years in which we were told you could have capitalism without democracy, it was the free Western open societies tend to be the winners in the soft power index, that produce the vaccines that actually work. And by the way, I think everyone should feel free to point this out. I made this point in Singapore not long ago, and it was felt to be so controversial that the organisers actually had to apologise. And the Guardian said, I hope the Guardian's here, the Guardian said my speech was shocking. I just want to check everybody's all right with me saying that. I mean, and then the Guardian is bearing up. At the heart of this idea of economic and political freedom is the idea of autonomy, the idea of trusting people and families to make their own decisions, buy their own homes, spend their own money, because that autonomy is not only morally right, it's the way to allow us all to be as creative and productive as possible and to enjoy and make the best use of the talents we have. And that sense of autonomy for individuals and for families has always turned out to be the most innovative and efficient way of running an economy. And what goes for people and for families is also, in my view, true of countries. And here I come to the point that Guy Verhofstadt might not agree with. Because that, in my view, and I'm conscious that this is not necessarily now a universal consensus, not that it ever was, in my view, that was what Brexit was all about. On June the 23rd, 2016, people made a momentous choice. They wanted to be free. They took back control of their money, their borders, and their laws, and they did it against the opposition of the vast majority of the ruling classes in this country and in all the great power centres of our country. What used to be called the establishment, the bishops, the BBC. Yeah, I hope I'm not, being too controversial here. The CBI. Most readers of the Times, I'm told, were in favour. 70 or 80% of the readers of the Times were in favour of Remain. Most MPs, vast majority of members of the House of Lords, massively pro-Remain. Remember, I don't know what the balance would be in this distinguished audience, but as soon as that happened, there was a concerted attempt to reverse it, or at least to stop the UK leaving properly. And the Treasury in particular wanted the UK to remain in alignment with the EU legal order. That's why we had all those arguments over the years about the so-called Chequers deal, and many of us rejected that approach out of pure logic. We said there was no point in leaving the EU if you were going to remain locked in the single market. There was no point in being a vassal state. There was no point in being a rule taker. You might as well be in the EU. So for years we fought trench warfare. People like Steve Baker, David Davis, many others were heroic. And as a result, we are out of the customs union and we're out of the single market. But you remember the circumstances in which we had to do that deal under the terms of the Ben-Burt Act, or as it was called, the so-called Surrender Act. We couldn't leave unless we agreed to the EU's terms. And there was no doubt that we faced a particular problem in Ireland, where we were told that we faced a choice. If the UK wanted to come out of the customs union and the EU internal market, and if we wanted to keep an open border across the island of Ireland, which we emphatically did for the sake of peace on the island and the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, then we would have to make sure that we somehow checked on goods that might go from Great Britain to Northern Ireland and then on into Ireland. And that is what the protocol does. And purely to help the EU, we agreed to check on those goods entering Northern Ireland, as I say, that might go on to Ireland. And I thought those checks would not be onerous, since there isn't actually that much stuff that falls into that category. Most of the goods stay in Northern Ireland. And this is all my fault. I'm fully accept responsibility. And the protocol itself, and this is why I signed it, contains lots of reassuring phrases about how Northern Ireland remains in the customs territory of the UK and will benefit from participation in the United Kingdom's independent trade policy, the protocol notes the importance of maintaining the integral place of Northern Ireland in the United Kingdom's internal market. But beneath the paint and plaster, there was the cold steel reality of EU control. And the Commission was in charge, and not the UK. And contrary to my hopes, they did not apply it sensibly. And we had the mad ban on sausages and potted plants and tractors, and heaven knows what, and people unable to send parcels to their grandchildren. We had very serious diversion of trade, as British retailers couldn't move goods like shortbread from one country, from one part of the country to the other, even if they didn't actually have stores in Ireland itself. And of course, these everyday frustrations were particularly acute for unionist communities in Northern Ireland, who felt they were being cut off from the rest of the UK, which I bitterly regretted and I felt was absurd, because the large majority of Northern Ireland trade is with the rest of the UK. And the problem I had was that there was nothing legally that the UK government could do, because we'd given that power away. And that is why we had the bill, to fix it and to sort it out. And that's why I believe we had that majority of 80 seats, because I think the people of this country sensed that we needed to fix it. And that bill does fix it. It's still in Parliament. It does fix all these problems. It removes any border checks down the Irish Sea. It would allow the UK to determine VAT rules in Northern Ireland, state aid, subsidies, and so on. And above all, it would allow Northern Irish firms to make goods and of any kind, put them on the market in Northern Ireland if they conform to UK standards and not EU standards. So a dual standard regime was envisaged. And I don't believe for one moment that it would have necessitated checks north-south, certainly not by the UK. We would not have done anything of the kind. It would have kept and respected the balance of the Good Friday Agreement. Now, the EU did not like that bill. They did not like it because it took away their control, and above all, because it frustrated their key objective by keeping Northern Ireland in the single market for goods. And that made it much more difficult for the UK to diverge and to do things differently, because of the strains that would place on the Union. And I can tell you that in all my conversations with our friends in the EU over the years, it was that idea of divergence, that whole sort of Singapore-on-Thames concept, whatever you may think of it, it was that idea of divergence that they feared the UK actually taking advantage of Brexit freedoms so as to be more competitive. And so, in my view, they used the Northern Ireland problem as a way of keeping us more or less where they wanted, so that their system, the European Court of Justice, and all the rest of it was still glomped on and, in some important respects, still in charge of part of the UK. And I remember Angela Merkel actually coming up to me at I think it was a G20 summit, and saying, if you continue with this bill, it will be a Shakespearean tragedy. Well, she turned out to be right there, though I leave it to you to work out which tragedy it was. And so I was thrilled when, in June, that bill sailed through the House of Commons unamended. I was pleased when the present Prime Minister and his predecessor said that they would continue with it. And so when I look at the deal that we have now, I, of course, have mixed feelings. I'm conscious of where the political momentum is and people's deep desire just to get on. And this has got to be about the people of Northern Ireland, the 1.9 million people, their businesses and their lives. And Given that we have got rid of the bill, I can see why so many people are attracted to accepting a compromise. And I agree passionately with Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, for whom I have the highest regard, that the people of Northern Ireland need their assembly and they need their government. And it's not for me to advise Sir Geoffrey, but I hope that he can find a way of reconciling himself and his party to this outcome, which is the fact that we have, and getting back into Stormont. But, and I am conscious I'm not going to be thanked for saying this, but I think it's my job to do so. We must be clear about what is really going on here. This is not about the UK taking back control. And although there are easements, this is really a version of the solution that was being offered last year to Liz Truss when she was Foreign Secretary. This is the EU graciously unbending to allow us to do what we want in our own country, not by our laws, but by theirs. They're not scrapping hundreds of pages of EU regulations. They're passing EU law. They're passing new regulations to allow British goods to pass from one part of this country to another, still under EU law, but with what they hope will be lighter bureaucracy. 21 data points on the forms instead of 80 to be completed by trusted traders who can show the EU that they have certain assets and goods for sale in Northern Ireland, and to be prominently labelled not for EU, among many other provisions and restrictions. Look, we've got to hope that it works and genuinely reduces frictions. I'm particularly concerned that goods going for processing and manufacturing in Northern Ireland from Great Britain, goods that are part of the supply chain, seem to be going through the red lane for firms above a certain size, which seems pretty crazy and not supportive of the UK internal market. And what this will certainly not do is allow goods made in Northern Ireland to be made according to UK standards, unless they're also EU standards for sale in Northern Ireland. Or at least it is very, very unclear the extent to which that would be allowed. It's very unclear for foodstuffs, for motor manufacturing, and all the rest of it. The EU single market remains paramount. And in that sense, this deal helps to accomplish the key objective that I spoke of. And so it acts as a drag anchor on divergence, and which, as I say, is the point of Brexit. There's no point in Brexit unless you do things differently. And then beneath the bother and the hassle of these rules, you have to ask yourself the key question. Who votes for the people who decide these rules? Who votes for the people who decide how your pet dog or cat can get to Northern Ireland and back? Who votes for the people who make laws about Easter eggs or cakes or boats or any other manufactured goods? Who votes for the people who set VAT rates on sanitary ware in Northern Ireland? No one in England or Scotland or Wales, and no one in Northern Ireland. And I think there was a reason, as I say, the public voted us an 80-seat majority in 2019. And that was because they instinctively knew that we had to fix this. And that's why we had the bill. And look, get to the punchline. I'm going to find it very difficult to vote for something myself, because something like this myself, because I believed that we should have done something different. No matter how much plaster came off the ceiling in Brussels. And I hope that it will work. And I also hope that if it doesn't work, we will have the guts to deploy that bill again. Because I've no doubt at all that that was what brought the EU to negotiate seriously. And in the meantime, I will continue to campaign for what I thought of and what I think of as Brexit and the logic of Brexit. Because this is nothing if it is not a Brexit government. And Brexit is nothing if we in this country don't do things differently. And we need to take advantage of it. And we need to be seen to take advantage of it. And let me give you an example. For years, the scientists have been calling for the ability to do something called CRISPR, C-R-I-S-P-R, which I'm sure you all know about, genome editing, which for some reason is banned under a ruling of the ECJ. Well, now that we're out, we can theoretically do it. We have the capability to do it. It doesn't mean franken-foods. It doesn't mean we're all going to be attacked by killer tomatoes. It will enable us to do all sorts of things to protect crops from disease, from frost, from blight, and so on. Will we do it? Will the UK be in the lead? Will we dare to diverge? Well, we're standing on the edge of the diving board, and it's not clear to me that we are going to. And so I say to you, let's take the plunge, even if it would appear that under this deal, those British genome-edited tomatoes could not go into the making of a, well, whatever, cheese and tomato sandwich in Northern Ireland, which, as I say, is going to be, I think, is a matter for regret. So let's dare to be different and do things differently. And we should dare to be different on the economy. I know that COVID cost a fortune, and there was not much we could do about that. But we're out of it now, and there's no point now in just emulating the high-tax, high-spend, low-growth European model. We should think not about raising corporation tax, but cutting corporation tax to Irish levels or lower, and really turbocharging investment to drive levelling up across the whole country, really showing the world what they wanted to see from 2016 onwards, that we are different now, because this is a Brexit government or this is nothing. And it's because this is a Brexit government that we got the biggest share of the vote since 1979. Let me give you just some examples of the ways divergence has helped us so far. Yes, it really is the case that it made a difference that we were out of the European Medicines Agency and therefore able to get the first licensed vaccine into the arms of any patient anywhere in the world. And that meant we had the fastest vaccine rollout, and that meant we were able to come out of lockdown faster than the rest of Europe. And we staged, therefore, the fastest economic recovery in the G7, and we have today, in spite of all the difficulties, the lowest unemployment since about 1974, and we will fix our problems, we will fix inflation. I'm no doubt that the government will be successful in what they're doing in getting inflation down. And that was because we dared, that success with vaccines was because we dared to be different. And we dared to be different on AUKUS, which I don't believe the Foreign Office would ever have allowed when we were still in the EU. I don't think they would ever have allowed such a rupture with our French friends and the raucous squawkers of the anti-AUKUS caucus. And we dared to be different finally when it came to the great geopolitical crisis that frankly dwarfs everything that I've so far discussed today, in which Andrew Neil mentioned just before I came on. When it was clear that Putin really might be so insane as to attack Ukraine, we were the first major European country to send quantities of lethal weaponry to help them. The NLAW anti-tank missiles that were so important in the battle for Kiev. And believe me, that would never have happened if we had stayed within the constraints of the so-called common foreign and security policy of the European Union. We would never have dared to be different if we had remained as we were, deferential to the primacy of France and Germany on Ukraine under the so-called Normandy process of 2014. And all I can say is how proud I am that by daring to be different, Brexit Britain has encouraged now the rest of Europe to give arms to the Ukrainians. And we know, of course, that our contribution is nothing compared to their heroism. They are fighting for all of us. They're fighting for Georgia, for Moldova, for the Balts, for Poland, as Andrew rightly said, for all the periphery of the old Soviet empire. And yes, on soft power, they have the soft power. They have a vibrant, dynamic, free, open society. They have elections that can go either way. And that is what they are defending, and that is what Putin hates and fears. They have a president who is not only a great war leader, but who was once the voice of Paddington in the Ukraine, of Paddington the Bear, in the Ukrainian version of the film. So I can say, in the struggle between the Russian bear and Paddington, my money is on Paddington. But sometimes soft power needs hard power to defend it, and the Ukrainians need that hard power now. The Ukrainians are fighting for freedom and democracy everywhere. Let us give them what they need and give it to them now. Slava Ukraini, and thank you very much for listening.
Shall we take the seats over there?
Thank you. Thank you.
Up to you. Thank you. So, the thought occurred to me, I would ask the audience to say, who thinks Brexit was a good idea? Put your hand up. Okay, so we don't have...
Yeah, I got the feeling that might be the case as we went along. But I am undaunted.
Has Boris changed anyone's mind?
I am undaunted. Look, I mean, anyway, the problem at the moment, and it's about what we're not getting right now, is I said it several times, this is a Brexit government or it's nothing. We got a massive mandate to change. People wanted a change in their lives. They wanted to see things done differently. And, you know, I've got to put my hands up for this as much as anybody. We haven't done enough yet to convince them that it can deliver the change they want to see. And I think that they're particularly dismayed about things like the small boats crossing the channel. But they also don't feel the economic change. And so we've got to break out of the model that we're in.
Based on what you've just said, you're obviously not going to be supporting the Windsor framework. Does that mean that you would expect to see
I think people have heard quite enough
division
about the Windsor. I've had camera crews outside my door asking me all week what I think about this. You've had about half an hour of my. Nobody can say you don't know my views on this subject now, or you might. Nobody say you haven't heard my views on this subject now. It is clear that this is where people are now. And, you know, it's clear from this room that this is what people want to move on.
So do you think
they want to do a deal? They don't want any more ructions, and I get that. I totally get that, and I've got to be realistic about it.
So should there be an election?
Well, there is going to be an election. We're going to win that election. That's not till January or till the end of next year.
Okay, fine. So just going through a few things. We're talking about Ukraine there. Do you think there's more we could do, and is Ukraine going to win? What more can we do?
I think Ukraine is going to win, but it's going to be very hard, and they need the maximum support. They need it now. And my argument is, why delay? You know, what happens in this conversation, we always end up giving them stuff sooner or later. Well, if it's the choice is between sooner or later, let's give it sooner. You know, we first of all, it was NLAWs, then it was HIMARS, then it was tanks. Now the question is about aviation, about planes. It's going to happen sooner or later. Let's do it sooner.
But do you think it's only going to be resolved militarily, or is it going to be resolved by negotiation?
Well, look, classically, people would say this is now tragically a war in which the Ukrainians are fighting and winning this war, but they depend on the support of us in the West. And they're the heroes, but they do need support. We must not fail in giving that support. What America has done has been absolutely spectacular. And I don't think people have realized the extent of the US support. $45–50 billion now of support for Ukraine. This is a massive commitment to transatlantic security by the Americans. I do worry a bit that that the atmosphere in Washington could change if Ukraine doesn't win this year. That's what needs to happen.
One of the things that was coming across in our research very strongly is that a large chunk of the world has not got the message and doesn't necessarily support the Ukraine.
I know. Well, we could try that. David, why don't we do another? We got massive support for Brexit. Let's see. Let's see. I mean, I thought I did pretty well considering how tough that audience was. I mean, you've got to be realistic. I had one vote in the audience at the start of the meeting. I was, the selection meetings go. That was really very tough. Let's just see who's basically who's basically a kind of Ukraino skeptic. Who thinks that the Russians might have the grain of a point? Who's willing to say that in a London audience? Anybody? I'm not hearing. Okay, right, that's good. That's solid. Okay, well, there's solid one thing.
What comes from our research is that in quite large parts of Africa, South Asia, North Asia, they're quite sympathetic. And, one of the problems could be that Russia persuades China to come in on their side, give them materials, because they feel it's the Cold War and they're being picked on. Is there a serious chance you think that might happen?
I think that's absolutely correct. I think that there are large parts of the world where it doesn't seem as clear to them as it does to you and me. We feel instinctively this is right and wrong, this is good and evil. Nothing could be clearer to me. This is a sovereign, independent European country that was invaded in a brutal and criminal way. And we should do everything we can to help them protect themselves. But I got to tell you, that's not how, whether it's because they have governments that actually are quite partial to the idea of being able to invade their neighbours when they choose or whatever. There are lots of mixed feelings about this. And I think it's certainly true that Russian and Chinese diplomacy has been very effective. And I think I was eavesdropping on your earlier conversation. We need to do better in getting the messages across. And I think the BBC is fantastically powerful and trusted. But I got to tell you a tragedy. I remember when I was Foreign Secretary being told that Russia today is at least as influential in some parts of sub-Saharan Africa as the BBC, and Russia today is actually more influential in Latin America than the BBC, or more watched, or I don't know about influential, but certainly has a bigger footprint, and that's pretty chilling. I mean, this was years ago. So people will only respond to the news they consume, and just as you're hearing a lot of bad news about Brexit. People, they're listening to that, and we've got to be smarter in communicating the reality of the situation.
So, I mean, one of the things that we've heard a lot about recently is the fact that they want to boost defence spending in the UK because of the war. And they're talking about, I don't know, 11, 12, 13 billion pounds. The amount that is actually being spent on the things that promote communication, like the BBC and the British Council, on the other hand, they seem to be cutting it back and back. And we had this discussion last year and the year before, where everyone's saying they think it's crazy that we're not actually putting far more money into all that. I mean, do you have a point of view about that?
Well, the BBC gets a lot of money from the licence payer, as far as I can remember. I think the gentleman in the front row was pointing that out just now, and that's a good thing. It's a fantastic emanation of British soft power. I've always wondered why the BBC can't make more money itself. With all this cash coming in, why can't they, organizations like Netflix, they seem to make a bob or two.
Well, I think
Amazon.
BBC Studios.
What about all that? We've got I think I said rather extensively in my speech, we've got the most talented media world we've got media people in the world here in London. We've got all sorts of cultural advantage? Why aren't we making better use of our talent?
If you look at the BBC finances, they make $5 billion a year, and I think about 1.6 billion of it comes from media. So the people that are sponsoring us, the BBC Studios, which is the external commercial part of the BBC, is making money. It always strikes me as weird that they'll cut back the World Service, which is funded by the Foreign Office. I think they've just scrapped the Arab Service, and it's really run on a total shoestring.
That's very sad. I think look, I mean, these services, I tried not to do. When I was Foreign Secretary, I really tried to keep all of that going, and as much of the foreign language stuff as we possibly could. I think that is sad. But I restate my point. When I go to BBC Studios, which I don't do as much as I used to, I can tell you for various reasons which you will know, I'm amazed at the contrast between those BBC studios and a private sector media organisation. And in a BBC studio, and I love the BBC. Thank you, BBC, for sponsoring this conference, etc. I owe everything to the BBC. They launched me. Little did they know. But when you go to a BBC studio, wherever it is, some wonderful town or city of in this country, it is absolutely pullulating with people in polo-necks, doing this, that, or the other. Loads and loads of people with clipboards, each knowing what their place in the hierarchy is. And that's not the case in private sector media organisations, where the cuts and the pressure, the shrinkage of advertising has been so intense that there's tumbleweed blowing down these newsrooms of some of these great local papers, and many of them have gone, and much of their business actually cannibalised by the BBC because of the way they give local news as well. So it's a great, big, wonderful thing, but I think it was the Director General himself who was overheard the other day saying what a fantastic, there you go, there's one on here, saying what a fantastic thing it was that they were able to get so much money from the license fee. And it is. What I'm saying is somebody who has to think about asking people across the country to pay a tax which they can be jailed for not paying is use that license fee well and use it to generate lots more income. That's what I think the BBC could do. It could be the flagship for British media around the world. It could be the great content vehicle for all the private sector companies, all the private sector media. It could be the dreadnought that sails the seven seas for the UK and gets our message across. But I don't know if it is doing that in the way.
Can we just come back to Brexit for a moment?
Yes, I don't think we've had enough about that.
Come
on.
Clearly,
I gave you about 15 paragraphs on Brexit.
No, let me ask you this question. I mean, clearly, you wanted to get it done.
Yeah.
Rishi now thinks he's got it done. When and if that goes through, Brexit will be done. So the question then is, well,
but it won't be. But that's the whole point. There's no point in this. That was what I decided. There's no point in this exercise if you don't do things differently. If we are just going to stick in the middle lane and be a kind of relatively high tax, relatively high spend, very heavily regulated European economy.
So here's my question.
Yeah.
What would you do different? I mean, I personally, I find it very hard to believe that we were going down to 19%, possibly to 17% corporation tax.
I know.
Ireland sat there on 12%. I had my fingers crossed we'd go down to 12.
What I would have done, in retrospect, what I wish we'd done, and I spent an awful lot of time with my friend, the former Chancellor, now Prime Minister, trying to see we need to set out our stall about Brexit Britain. What I wish we had done is put a big invest here sign over Britain as soon as we were out of COVID, as soon as it was remotely credible. I think we should have done something. We should have outbid the Irish. We should have said, this is it. Come here, we will give you tax breaks of a kind, or, you know.
So you think tax rate should be 10%?
What it needed was a big sign that things were different and that the UK was the place to come to. Because what's so interesting is that I think the global audience, when it happened, thought, that's interesting. What do the Brits mean by that? What are they going to do? And we had this long civil war about what Brexit was. And we never really,
but I think
we haven't yet said we're doing things differently. And that's why things like the genome editing, get on and do it.
Right.
You know,
but what else?
We've got to move.
What else should we be doing?
Well,
are there trade deals we should be doing? Are there relationships with other countries we should be doing?
Of course. But there are things you should be doing on financial services, on data. There is a huge amount that we should be getting on with, and I think that.
But it seems to me, as someone who did actually vote for Brexit, as you probably gathered, that people agreed with the principle and wanted to see something different. There have been several things that have been different that you just outlined, which I don't think you get enough credit for. But as you say, there is no sort of manifesto of things that would make a real difference, starting with tax. I mean, I just don't understand why they've gone for high tax rather than low tax, and I don't really know what the areas are that they could liberalise. Maybe you should set that out slightly stronger, and then people might support you.
Well, I think that's right, but don't forget, it wasn't a trivial thing that we, as I said just now, we were able, because we had a different regulatory regime, and people will dispute this, but if you look at it, it's absolutely true. We were outside the European vaccines program. We were able to do things very, very differently, and we approved a vaccine faster than any other country. The Medical Health Regulation Agency, MHRA, was able to approve, I think, both Pfizer and AstraZeneca before anybody else. I'm fairly certain of that. And that gave us the edge in rolling out that vaccination program. And that was a totally massive thing. And, it was I would say Brexit saved lives.
Right.
And I absolutely would. But people find it very difficult to accept that point. They say, because I think the general sort of gloom about the subject has been so intense. When you look at stuff like the chemicals regulation, the financial services, Solvency II, MiFID, all those sorts of things, these are areas where we're now making progress. But I think, and Rishi definitely wants to make progress on them, but we need to be talking about it more. And I think what we've got to avoid is the idea that we can kind of make everybody love us more by sort of being more, just not being different.
I mean, one of the things I would like to get your view on is that now that we are not in the EU and we can do what we like, there are certain countries or blocs that we might get more friendly with. I mean, is, for example, the Commonwealth the answer? We're having a session this afternoon.
Yes.
And how does the Queen's death impact on the relationship with the Commonwealth?
The Commonwealth is a brilliant institution, and 52 countries that have many of the young people of the world, the future markets of the world. We should be doing a lot more with it. And I don't think as a country, the UK realises what an incredible resource the Commonwealth is for us. And the French and the Germans used to say to me, God, this is fantastic. If we had something like this, we would make much more of it.
So thinking specifically about...
I think we need to intensify our Commonwealth cooperation. I always felt Commonwealth summits were just too kind of diffuse. there were not enough clear objectives, whether on trade or whatever. It was too general. We need to find a way of making the conversation much more action.
At the moment, the debate about the Commonwealth is largely, now that it's King Charles, not Queen Elizabeth, is that going to result in them getting rid of the monarchy and it gradually diluting? No. Or do you see it as something which we can inject more into? And if so, what?
I think that the monarchy, I don't know what anybody else thinks, but I think one of the most stunning thing about the sad death of Her Majesty the Queen last year was how seamless, how natural the transition seemed. I don't know whether it was just. I've got to tell you, I as a politician, as somebody who cares passionately about it all, who is worried, I didn't know. I didn't know what would happen, and I remember being in the House of Commons when the tributes were paid to Her Majesty. How absolutely uniform and how heartfelt were the tributes from all benches, not just to the late Queen, but also to the new King, and how emphatic people were in their support for the institution. I was really taken. Even really quite hardened left-wingers on the other benches were very clear about what they thought and said and meant. You could see that they meant it. And I think that the value of the institution was really proved.
So one of the things we were talking about earlier is the outstanding performance of the UAE.
Yes.
They are the country that has done best, seem to be making the most investment in soft power
in your soft power ranking.
Yeah,
yes.
what can we learn from them? Have we done things that we should be doing better as a result?
Yeah, well, the UAE, I think that it's an absolutely amazing country. And the UK, it's like the Commonwealth, we have total amnesia. We forget our links. And the flag actually only went down in, I think, the Trucial States in 1971. And this is a part of the world where, like it or not, the UK is deeply familiar. We should be doing far more. And there is a massive opportunity. And I've had a good fortune to have a lot of time with His Royal Highness Mohammed bin Zayed. I've talked to him a lot about what the UK and the UAE could do. I think what we can learn from the UAE is, and they're fantastic PR. I mean, the thing they did, the thing that with their space program, is pretty good. I'm very keen on our space program, but it's had a bit of a hiccup, and we need to keep going. So I think much more trade. I mean, people don't know about the extent of UAE investment in the UK. It's massive, but we need to be.
Well, I think a lot of people don't know about the extent of investment by the UAE in lots of things: aid in Africa, space, all manner of different things. But just turning to the States for a moment. I mean, now that we are floating away from Europe,
no, we're not.
Well, okay,
we're not. I mean,
are we just the 51st?
I think just back on that sort of that Ukraine point. I genuinely think it is true that we are now more influential in Europe about foreign policy because we're outside it, or outside the EU structure, than we were when we were in it. Okay. I genuinely think it was the sight of Brexit Britain doing this thing that helped to galvanise the rest of the.
So thinking about our relationship,
we're not drifting away from Europe.
Thinking about our relationship with the US, then.
Yes.
Are we just the 51st state? I mean, Putin says we're a poodle to do whatever they say. What's going to happen to the relationship with America?
Well, obviously that's not true because we don't even yet have a free trade agreement with the United States. That I think it'd be a good thing. I think the UK and the US transatlantic relationship has been the great fact of the last 120 years in geopolitics. It's worked. It's helped avert disaster in 2 world wars, and I think you can see it working very well in the worst conflict now since the Second World War, as Andrew Neil rightly said. We are working hand in glove. I think it'd be fair to say that there is strong support for the Ukrainians in both London and Washington. And the result, one of the results of what has happened geostrategically is that NATO is very, very greatly strengthened. And that institution in which the US has primacy, NATO is the incarnation of US military power in Europe. But it also, and the UK is the number 2. And that organization is now immensely strengthened by what has happened, and you can see that from what Finland and Sweden are doing. But also, I think the arguments now about Ukraine are
So we've got a couple of minutes left. I've just got one last question, which is really about, 10 years from now, what's your future? I mean, are you? I think. Are you going to be running for election in America?
No. Well, that's an interesting idea. No, I had to give up my. I had to give up my American citizenship because it was becoming very, very expensive. Their ruthless internal tax department there. I was born in New York.
So what's the next big job? Is it head of NATO? What is it?
I've done a lot of big
head of the Commonwealth?
I've got a big budget of words I have to write, and I'm churning it out. Scribble. I think that I'm going to.
You're returning.
I'm going to get on the things I'm going to say. I obviously need to do a better job of explaining and supporting and defending Brexit and trying to get people to understand. It is clear from this wonderful meeting, which I thank you, that we need to do more on that. Right? I care deeply about the agenda that this government was elected to deliver, which was levelling up. And I do not want us to lose sight of that. The UK is hopelessly imbalanced as an economy. It is quite wrong that so much wealth and productivity should be concentrated in London and the southeast, and a huge waste of human and other capital. There is a massive opportunity for us to become the richest country in Europe by a long way, if we could level up properly. And I'm going to keep going on that. And the last thing is Ukraine. Right. And I was able to build a good relationship with President Zelensky.
And you're going to be doing more for you.
I think it's important to campaign for that, because the point you made, David, earlier was totally right. Too many people around the world don't get it and are apathetic. And there is a risk in Washington that some elements of the Republican Party will start to go wobbly on it. And there's some sort of crazy stuff. I don't know whether you're seeing this stuff. People start saying that Putin is a conservative. Give me a break. That's a disaster.
So we shouldn't expect you to be returning to the plough in Oxfordshire anytime soon. You're going to be talking at large.
No. I'm definitely. You mean the plough, the pub, or the?
No, the Cincinnatus reference.
Yeah, no, I'm going to be taking. I think it's very, very unlikely that I'll need to do anything big in politics. And I've done a lot. I think that I need to get on with trying to. I've got
making money.
There's that, but I've got big deadlines. And pages and pages to write.
I think you should take notes from Messiah. He'll show you how to do the social media.
Is that right? I know. We all need to.
Anyway, thank you for your time. We've slightly overrun.
Thank you very much, David.
Thank you all for listening.
Thank you all for.
And lunch is now served upstairs.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.